Hi, and welcome to the webinar, Stop Sabotaging Your Agile Transformation. Thanks for spending your lunch break with us. I'm your host, Rosalind Rago, and my job is to help make this webinar as enjoyable and valuable as possible. David Hawks, say hi, David.
Hi, David.
Is the presenter. Before I let him have the floor, I wanted to go over a few logistics and expectations for the webinar. So we will present for 45 minutes and then do a Q&A for the last 15. To submit a question, all you have to do is hit the question and answer button. It's black at the top of your screen, and a window should pop up, and it'll let you submit your question there. If you submit your questions throughout the webinar, we will prioritize them for the Q&A portion, and we'll try and answer as many as possible. And at the end of the webinar, everything will be recorded, and we'll package everything up and send you an email with the deck and the Q&A tomorrow morning. So now I'll let David have the floor.
All right, thanks, Rez. That we see that they can't hear me. They can hear me now. All right. Okay. You muted. I didn't unmute. All right. Let's start over. So what we're going to share today are a set of common things that we see leaders how they sabotage a transformation. Often a transformation. The leadership hires us, but then they say, go focus on the team level. And they say, go teach the team, go train the team, go coach the team. But the leaders are probably more critical in a transformation. And today I'll share some reasons why. So let's start off with thinking about what's involved in a change. So whenever we make a change, we start off with status quo, whatever we've been doing, whatever we've historically been doing, whatever we've been successful doing in the past. We had some level of success. There's probably something that's a problem and that we want to introduce a change. But when we introduce a change, the first thing when we introduce a change, do we get better right away? Or what we see is we actually get worse before we get better. And we call this next phase chaos and resistance. The idea is that at that point of inflection, the team, they knew how to play by the old rules, but they don't necessarily know how to play by the new rules. They don't know how to win at the new game. They knew how to be successful. They knew what their identity was as a person in the organization in the old way, and they're kind of freaking out. And so the one question is are leaders supporting us as we're going through this chaos and resistance? And then we enter a phase of what we call integration and practice. Once the team gets to kind of the bottom, they start figuring out these new rules, but they're not good at them. They suck at these new rules, these new practices, in any change, if it's Agile or anything else. And then the idea is now they got to start applying these new practices, and eventually they'll get good at those new practices. And the whole hope is that by the end of implementing these new practices, that we have a new status quo that's better than where we started. But we've seen many organizations that make a change and maybe they don't have enough patience to or support to push through, and then they make another change and they just keep kind of going down and down and down. We call that the downward death spiral of change, and we don't want to get there. So how can leaders support your teams as they're going through this change curve, if you will? So the first sabotage that we want to highlight is a management style. So traditional management has been approaching from more of a top-down nature, from a command and control nature, and more driving versus what we want to switch to is more of a servant leadership style, where the leaders are leading and in providing kind of in more of a servant leadership style approach. Now most of our workforces, we would say, are knowledge workers, and knowledge workers demand more autonomy than ever before, and this requires a different type of leadership in order for us to empower these workers and a different level of ownership where the ownership is in the organization. So as companies are trying to adopt Agile, they need to make this shift, but this requires a change in the leadership style. So the first thing that we see here is that there's a cultural misalignment. We can come in and assess an organization in this competing values framework, and as organizations get bigger, guess which one of these four quadrants dominates the other quadrants as an organization gets larger, and that's typically the control culture, right? As we get bigger, the leadership style is much more about control. And if you think about Agile and Agile values and Agile principles, you would start seeing that Agile, while it has some elements of control, it emphasizes some of these other quadrants as well, right? So collaborating as far as team and working together, the creating or innovation aspects, as well as kind of competing, getting things done quickly. And so we want to see a balance. And so a lot of times people are saying they want to go to Agile. Leaders are saying we want to go to Agile because they're realizing they need more balance, but they're still managing in much more of from the control side of the equation. So the solution here is what we ask leaders to do is become more of these servant leadership style. We talk a lot about self-organizing teams in Agile, and that requires not only a change in how I'm acting as a leader, but also how I'm managing and encouraging my staff, my employees. I'm encouraging them to step up, and I need to support them as they are trying to step up and have a voice. Some people are more willing to charge forward, others might need to be encouraged. And so a couple of questions that I would have leaders change kind of how they approach the team. A lot of times traditional questions would be, what's the date and what's going to be in it? You guys go do Agile, but what's the date, what's going to be in it? And those are much more kind of more management, command and control type of questions of, what are you guys doing? Are you going to make the date? Are you going to get it on time? A servant leadership style dialogue would change to more, what are you learning and how can I help? So, what are you guys learning, which is encouraging a continuous improvement culture, is encouraging the teams to try new things, is maybe even pushing the team to try new things and making it safe for teams to try new things. And the how can I help is what impediments can I remove that the team is having. So my job is no longer as a manager to manage the work and manage the day-to-day. The team is self-organizing to do that. But my job becomes helping pave the way, helping clear the obstacles on behalf of the team. So the first stage of what we call the path to agility, and we're going to map this on this kind of J curve, if you will, this change curve. The first stage that we have, we call align. And this kind of combats this initial element of, are we all aligned in our purpose of why we're making a change? Because if we're going to ask people to go off and take this leap of faith and go through chaos and resistance, which is scary and uncomfortable and stressful, we better make sure we've got a clear goal of where we're trying to be. And that goal can't be like, because we want to be agile. Like, how are you going to measure that? What is the success of, when are you agile enough? And so what we want to use is more of a business goal. Like, we need to be more competitive in our market, which means we need a faster time to market. We need to learn faster with the market demands, or adjust based on the market demands, or increase productivity or quality. What is the business imperative? And we got to get everybody bought into that business imperative as leaders. And then we've got to figure out and create a plan of how are we going to get through this change, and what are we going to do as leaders in order to support that. and get that kind of continuous improvement culture established. So that's what we call that first stage is are we all aligned around purpose, and are we all aligned on how we're going to even approach getting there? The second sabotage is what I call lack of support to improve. So are we supporting the team as they're going through chaos and resistance? And, are we supporting them as they're kind of having a little bit of a freak out moment? Even middle management goes through quite an identity crisis. So our upper management, senior leaders supporting the middle management as they're going through this change. Because here's what we're often saying is we're saying, we need to make all these changes and all these improvements, but we can't go any slower, right? But we just said that we're going to get worse before we get better. And if as leaders we're saying, but we got so much that we got to get done, we got to keep going as fast as we're going, which is kind of like trying to change a tire while you're going 100 miles an hour down the highway. And so what are we doing to kind of create the space? This is an investment, and Agile transformation is an investment in the long term. So what are we doing in the short term to support that? Are we accepting that, maybe it's just for a sprint or two, maybe it's 3 sprints and we're going to go down and we're going to come back up. The organizations that don't create any space for learning might stay down a lot longer than organizations that say, we're all in, let's make these changes, let's pull the Band-Aid off quick, let's get there as fast as possible. Maybe we just go down really quickly. And the reality is we kind of want that J curve, we kind of want a bunch of little small ones, right? Like we want to make a change and improve. We want to make a change and improve. We don't want to go really deep for really long and then come back up the other side. So the first thing that leaders can do to support and kind of combat this sabotage is first educate at all levels. So this doesn't just mean go get the teams trained, but that is a critical component. So don't just train the leadership, but don't just train the team. So if the teams are going to be self-organizing teams that are taking ownership of their problem, well, then they need to be armed with the knowledge to be able to solve those problems. And if the team's going to be dependent on their leaders, well, the leaders need to understand the new lingo and the new information and how their role changes. And what signal does it send to the team if you say, as a manager or a senior leader, you say, hey, we're going to do this Agile thing. You guys all go get training, but I don't need training. What signal does that send? Do you truly support it? Are you truly bought in? Are you learning as a leader what you need to know in order to understand what the team's doing, why the team is working in a different way, how to support the team in doing those things? So first thing we want to do is make sure we're getting education at all levels of the organization, and that might even include into the business and the business side and the key stakeholders that are going to be involved with the team as well. The other thing is that we got to create safety because the team's going to suck for a little while, right? We are going down through this chaos and resistance. So we've got to give the team safety to try new things. We talk about like celebrating the suck. It's like, it's okay. It's okay for us to make mistakes. We want to create a safe to fail environment. Or, if you want to put a positive spin on that, create a safe to learn environment. Are you creating a culture of constant learning and constant improvement? In order to do that, the team's got to be willing to have the courage to try new things. That's why one of the Scrum values is courage. Do your teams have the courage to try new things, or are they too scared that if they try something and they fail, management's going to come down hard on them? So are you as a leader helping the teams feel comfortable? They're going through something new. You've asked them to do something new in Agile, and are you giving them the space or the slack to try new things and the safety that it's okay, you're going to mess up. That's okay. What are you learning from it? What are you learning? How can I help? Right? Those are the things that we want to go back to. So what we see is the second stage of the path to agility is learn. So we've aligned around mission, and now we are looking at, okay, what are we learning? And are we creating a culture? Not only learning is both knowledge, which would be like classroom or read a book kind of knowledge, and learning is also practice, right? So we start doing the things, we start learning by making mistakes, by trying things and they don't work. And so one of the most important elements of learn is actually establishing this continuous improvement culture. And one of the quickest ways for a leader to sabotage or what I call, create the resistance or strengthen the resistance is that if the team starts escalating issues up and they say, hey, we're having these problems, leaders, can you do something about it? And if the leaders don't take action, immediate action, what signal does it send down to the team if the team's saying, we've got these problems, you've asked us to do Agile, and then the management doesn't remove any of the obstacles quickly? What that signal says to me is that you guys aren't serious. And so what then the team starts doing is then they're like, well, all right, management, this is just a fad then. They don't really want us to make this change. So we'll just wait this thing out. And then it's gonna perpetuate the resistance and the problem. So the third sabotage is probably one of the biggest issues I see every organization struggling with, is that we're drowning in a sea of opportunity. We have way too many things that we're trying to do. And there's, the reality is your company can generate more ideas than your team can deliver. We could sit down and we could have a workshop with your business leaders and say, let's generate ideas for the next hour. And you could come up with years worth of work or backlog for your team. So every team in every part of the organization is typically drowning in a sea of opportunity. There's way more demand than there is throughput that the team can do. So let's look at how we've normally assigned work in the past and then how that compares to Agile. So let's say we have a set of people over here and we've got a project. And the first thing we historically would do is say, who do we need for this project? So we would say, all right, let's assign Alex, James, and Janet to this project. And then we get another project and we say, well, who do we need for that? And we say, well, we need Alex, Carter, and Cameron for that. And then we get another project and we say, well, we need Alex, James, and Will for that. Anybody starting to see a problem? Maybe Alex, some of you are like, Alex has got a lot of job security. Alex is really excited because she's in demand and her skills. Or maybe Alex is dusting off her resume and feeling overworked. So, when we look at most organizations are saying all projects 1, 2, and 3 are high priority. They all got to get done. And maybe the dates are already set and they all got to get done by the end of the quarter, which is only like 3 days away. We got to get everything done by the end of the quarter. So how do you think Alex decides what to work on next? What are the things that if Alex being told everything is high priority, everything is of high importance, everything is high value, and Alex gets assigned 3 things, what Alex typically will do is prioritize either in 3 major ways. Either she's going to say, which one's the easiest so I can just get it off my plate as fast as possible. Alex is going to say, which one's the coolest feature that I could work on that's the most interesting to me or makes my resume look better so I could get out of this place. Or number 3, which is whoever's screaming the loudest or whoever she likes the most or whoever buys her beer, and brings her donuts in the morning, whatever that thing is, right? And that's how most organizations are actually being run, is that because the senior leaders who are being paid the big bucks are not making decisions for the company because they're saying everything is high priority. The people furthest removed from understanding the business strategy are prioritizing your company based on easiest, coolest, and whoever's screaming loudest. That's how most companies are actually being run. And Agile is trying to combat that, right? Agile is combating that by saying, you know what, we need to actually form a team of people and we need to take the work and we need to break it down into deliverable chunks. And we need to prioritize those chunks so that if we look through this queue, this backlog, and we need to let the team pull work in as opposed to pushing work onto the team. So one of the main things that management has to do is limit WIP and prioritize. By limit WIP, we mean limit work in process. How many things are we working on at one time? And Scrum does that by limiting how many things we pull into a sprint, into like a 2-week cycle. And we got to prioritize our work. I know everything is important, but what are the things that are the most important? Because the team can only get so much done over a 2-week period. And this is why we switched from a concept of pushing work onto the team for where the team is pulling work in. And that comes from kind of the lean world. And so we want to switch to more pull versus push. We need to limit WIP, and this is where the management has to work with the business to make sure we're getting clear priorities. And so this gets it to our third stage of the path to agility, which is focused on getting predictable. And so getting predictable, the first thing we have to do is get all of our work visible. We've got to prioritize, we've got to limit WIP, and the team's got to figure out some new practices, things like how to break work down into small chunks that fit into, if you're doing Scrum, into 2-week cycles. How do we get things that are potentially shippable at the end of every 2 weeks? How do we get things that are done? So as leaders, what you're doing is enabling the ability for the team to focus for 2 weeks and actually get things done. And you're emphasizing the teams to get predictable. And I know a lot of teams are doing Agile because they want to get faster. But we strongly believe that you have to get predictable before you get faster. Because if a team's not predictable and you say go faster, they're going to go all over the place, right? And when they make a change, if they're not predictable, they make a change. They don't really know if that change helped them or hurt them. And so we encourage teams that you got to get predictable first, and then you can start figuring out how to tune the system. So we apply this over that integration and practice in the J-curve, because at that point, the team's starting to put these practices in place, and they can start getting good at these practices, and they can start getting more predictable in their delivery. And here's a huge win for you as a leader in your organization. If your team can get predictable, then when the business asks for something new, you now have the visibility to be able to say, hey, if this comes in, this thing can't make it. And before we got to this stage, we really weren't able to have really clear conversations about the impact of change. But once teams can get predictable, we really can talk about the impact of change and be a true partner with the business around the impact of changing scope or changing needs or changing requirements, which we know are going to happen on a monthly basis. The fourth sabotage is this focus on output versus outcome. And output is something that we often is easier to measure. It's what we kind of were trained from kind of more industrial era management techniques of like, how many widgets are we creating? How busy are people? What's the efficiency? And I would say that, efficiency and output are not actually our goal. Our goal is, as an organization, as a delivery team, our number one purpose is to deliver value, is to maximize as much value as possible that we can. And arguably the most outcome with the least amount of output is really what we're after. There's a scary stat in our industry that says 64% of the features we build are rarely or never used. So do we really have an output problem, right? That, if 64% of the things that we build are the wrong things, then I would argue that we don't actually have an output problem. So let me kind of draw a little bit of just checking the switch. Okay.
Yep.
So let's kind of talk through a scenario. So traditional pre-Agile, I've got a project and I've got to plan it. And what I would do is I've got my starting point and I've got some target that I need to hit out here. And I would create a plan to hit this target. So, in order to create this plan, what I would do is I'd go around to all of my resources. Yeah, I used to call the people the resources, right? And I'd go around and I'd say, how long is it going to take? And I would say, all right, well, it's going to take Reese 2.2 days to do this or 3.8 days to do that. And then, Jim's going to pick this up for a week. And then we create this plan, and we all probably have created a plan like this at some point. And we get to the end, and I kind of liked creating these plans. Like, it was kind of like solving a puzzle. Like, you take all the estimates, or even as an early dev manager, I would just estimate for everybody, because what's more empowering than me telling you how long it's going to take you to get something done, right? And so I'd build this plan, I'd show it to leadership, and they'd be like, wow, you guys really know what you're doing over there. Look, you know what everybody's going to be doing every single day for the next 6 months. You know what everybody's going to be doing the day after Memorial Day, the day after Labor Day. You got it all planned out. Man, you guys know what you're doing. Now let's think about, at the day that I created this plan, the point that we created this plan up front, is this our smartest point in our project? No, this is our dumbest point. This is the dumbest point, but we tend to make the hardest decisions and lock them in for the life of the project. And then we manage to this plan. And are we open to change as things come up? No, we're like resisting all changes to this plan. And that's why I call these plans now Mythical Certainty, right? And the reason why I call them that is because the plan is really precise. 2.8 days, or 2.2 days, 3.8 days. We know exactly what everybody's going to be doing every single day. But there's a level of precision in the plan that does not match the level of accuracy of our requirements that are the input into the plan. So we've given ourselves an illusion of certainty, right? We created the plan, everybody feels comfortable. Oh, whew, we got a plan, but in the exactness of the plan makes us feel comfortable. But the reality is the exactness of the plan is based on some fuzziness, right, in terms of our requirements. And so with Agile, we don't want to focus on output, which is like managing to this plan, as much as we want to focus on delivering value. And so if we hit the plan, does that guarantee that we deliver the most value possible given this time period? No, it just guarantees that we delivered based on the assumptions we had at the beginning. So what do we do with Agile, right? You could go with what I call hippie Agile, right? We're in Austin, like you could just try like hippie Agile, and you could just go to your leadership and say, hey man, we're Agile. Like, you'll get it when you get it, man. And see how that goes. Probably not. Don't write those down. Like, Dave said on 328, like, you'll get it when you get it. You could try that, but they might free your future to go try that hippie crap somewhere else. So let's look at what do we really do with Agile, right? We actually plan a lot in Agile. The difference is we don't ever lock the plan in, because we know things are going to change, or that we're going to learn more along the way. So we're going to set out in the direction of the red target. Based on the information we have, the best thing we know is we need to head towards the red target. But the reality is, we don't know that that's where we want to end up. We don't know that that's the best scenario, or the most value is hitting the red target. We think, based on our dumbest point, we should head towards the red target. So we do. And then we inspect and adapt. We apply empirical process control, and a couple weeks in, we say, all right, have we learned anything new that says that we should keep going towards the red target, or that we should adapt our plan? And almost always, we learn something new, or some new change, or some new higher priority thing comes up. And we have a conversation with the business about, hey, we could do that new high priority thing, but now we can't do this other thing, but that's what's the most value, so we should adapt our plan. And we continue to make these little inspection and adaptation cycles along the way. And again, our goal isn't to hit the red target. It isn't to inspect and adapt to get to the red target. It's actually to get to a different target. But this new target is a goal of maximizing the value. That's what our goal is actually. Is not to hit the red target, but to hit the target that's going to give us the most value, given the constraint of time, right? We always have a constraint of time. And so what our real purpose is, and where leaders come into play, is that we want to make sure we are accelerating learning along the way. So we talked about learning before as learning as a team in terms of their practices, and now we're talking about learning from a product perspective. Are we learning about what's the most valuable thing to work on, and then what can we deliver around that? Now, another part of this gets into how our teams are structured. Are our teams structured for output reasons or for outcome reasons? And so what we see is as organizations have scaled, we have formed teams along component layers. So our component layers could be things like our user interface, the middle tier, like the back end or the database. So we've got these different layers. And let's take a scenario of what happens when we get a business requirement. So one scenario is that a business requirement comes in and the UI team reads it. And they read this and then they create a queue of, they need something from the middle tier. And of course that sits in some kind of queue for the middle tier to pick up. Because we want the middle tier people, if we're focused on output, which this is focused on output, is and optimize for output. We want to make sure that the middle tier team is always busy, so we always need a queue of work for the middle tier team to do. And then the middle tier team probably needs something from the database, so they assign something to the database team, but of course, there's a queue of work sitting there. And then eventually the database team will deliver something back up to middle tier, the middle tier will deliver something back up to UI, and then the UI finally will deliver something to our customer. Now, is our customer happy? Was this a very quick cycle time, or how long did it take for us to deliver this? No, it actually is really slow because it has to go sit through all of these queues all the way through, all the way back up to the customer. So the cycle time from the time that the customer made the request, the time it gets all the way through this process back to them. And the question is, oops, I think I just lost something. So the question is, the cycle time that we have from one to the other, the question becomes, how long does that take? And then the question is, does it ever circle back, right? Do we loop back? Does it get to the UI and then go back to the middle tier? So we have a very complicated system that we're structured there, and a lot of handoffs and a lot of dependency management. And so what we really want to do is actually change from this kind of more output focus, so the red there is the same as the black ovals that I drew, to more of a outcome focused. And so this is where one of the things as leaders that we need to look at is what's the opportunity to create what we call feature teams. Feature teams that are cross-functional teams. We want to simplify the system in which all the people are working and saying, all right, how can we focus so that the teams are all aligned and the people that need to talk all day, every day are on the same team. And they need to coordinate with people like database people across teams. But what we have created in most of our organizations is we've sub-optimized for delivering value. We've actually optimized for output. Right, the database team is creating a bunch of database code. But how well does the database team actually understand the business requirements if it's filtered through the UI team, through the middle tier team to the database team? They probably don't understand the business requirements very well at all, but they're building us a really good database architecture. But I don't know if that's really the goal, right? The goal isn't just to build a lot of great database code. The goal is actually to deliver value to the customer as quickly as we can. Right? And so that gets to, when we look at the fourth stage of the path to agility, we call that one accelerate. And this is where we're not only looking at, okay, we got predictable, but now we're looking at our teams and saying, how long does it actually take from the time that we took something in as a request and that we validated that with the market? And that could be both from a how long it takes for us to build it, but it also could be, how much like upfront requirements or planning or budgeting or, portfolio planning that we're doing, or it could be downstream, and it could be how much, from a DevOps perspective, how long does it take for us to deploy? How often do we deploy? Are we deploying, only once a quarter, or are we deploying, once every day, or once a week? And so Accelerate starts looking at, we start looking at not only the practices of like applying Scrum, but we're looking at DevOps, and we're looking at things like theory of constraints and how do we optimize the whole value stream. And that's where, when people say, well, what do managers do now? You know, like managers used to be taskmasters. They used to be in the weeds of what everybody does every day. Well, here's where management starts to play, because these issues across the full value stream are at a cross-team level. And so this is where managers have to work with other managers to figure out how do we optimize the whole system, as opposed to, you know, at one point in my career, I was a manager of developers. And so I would focus on just getting the developers to go faster, which in hindsight, what I realized is I was just making the QA people drown in a sea of opportunity, because the developers were creating more and more code that was then, you know, sinking the QA team, which was keeping us from actually getting value to the customer as fast as possible. So that's what we want to look at. And then the last thing that we have is, if we can start getting where we have this short feedback loop, this quick cycle time to our customer, then that's what allows us to truly start being at what I would call an adaptive organization, where the principles of Agile start permeating throughout the whole organization. And what we start looking at is now our whole organization can be a learning organism. So just because somebody in the business has an idea, maybe that's a good idea, maybe it's not. But if we can deliver a small part of that quickly and validate it with the market, then the business as an entity can start working with agility, right? And we can start having an adaptable organization. And this starts challenging things in terms of how we do our annual budgeting process. You know, is that truly agile? I would challenge maybe not. You know, our HR policies. Are we managing in a team-oriented way? Are we doing performance management in a team-oriented way? Or are we doing like a stack ranking, you know, competitive environment? Well, that would be conducive to agile self-organizing teams, right? So what are we doing in terms of how we're managing our team, motivating our teams, and then, you know, and that gets into this kind of adaptable organization. So those are the top, I think it was four sabotages that we see. And, you know, we'd love to, if there's questions coming in, go ahead and kind of send those in, and we'll have some dialogue as those questions come in, just to kind of highlight. I think many of the people on the webinar knew who we are and what we do. But, you know, what we do is basically help you through this path to agility, in terms of helping guide you through coaching through this at a leadership level, or at a team or at a team level, as well as the education, the training, and, you know, a lot of our kind of DNA and the way that we approach it is that we are trying to help diffuse the resistance, if you will, or the tension, and make this as kind of fun and engaging of a journey as possible. And that usually starts with some of the training that we do. So Rez, are any questions coming in?
Not yet. I think you may have explained everything so well.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Or everybody was just typing on their laptop while I was talking. Eating lunch. Eating lunch. Yeah. All right.
We have, what tips do you have besides time and having time management, and having management show support to encourage former waterfall employees to access to self-empowerment?
Yeah, so I think one of them, so around that, I think that this waterfall to agile shift is definitely a mindset shift. And just even empowering is a tough thing, because we could walk into a room and say, okay, you're empowered. And then we hear a lot of crickets chirping, right? Because the team's like, sure I am, right? There's a trust issue. And so it takes time for us to kind of work through. And so we got to figure out, how do we get some quick wins? And how do we get the team where they start realizing, oh, we do have ownership here. And some of that is, as managers, is going to be helping the teams, the Scrum Master trying to encourage the teams to kind of get out of their shell. And then also as managers, you want to do this with one-on-one conversations, and from a one-on-one standpoint is again, asking the questions like, what are you learning? You know, and when they say, well, nothing, it's like, well, what are you gonna do to learn some new stuff? Like it's the motivation, both from we want to achieve a new goal and everybody's bought into that goal, and then there's the motivation of, hey, you got to hold your teams accountable for improving, and if they're not, right, then that's what you're holding them accountable for, is like, why aren't y'all having good retrospectives? Why aren't y'all speaking up? Why aren't you sharing your ideas in a positive way? But you're holding them accountable for that more than what we used to hold them accountable for, which is like, did you get all your work done by a certain date? You want to push them for trying things.
All right. Second question: when you are changing the way the leadership prioritizes items and transforms the all urgent projects into a product backlog for the team to pull from, what practices do you recommend?
Yeah. So with prioritization, the first thing that we want to do is we don't do the divide and conquer strategy, which what I mean by that is don't go talk individually to all your stakeholders, who of course, all of them think their thing is the highest priority thing. But what you want to do is use techniques that get all of them in a room and talking with each other, as opposed to fighting with you. You know, if you're the one that's in charge of trying to get things prioritized. They all think their thing's highest priority. We only have so many people to do the work. And so what we want to do is encourage techniques that are helping the business leaders figure out together what's the best thing for the business, not necessarily for their department, but for the business. And we might need to remind them of that sometimes. And so those techniques, a couple of them I'd look at is, one of my favorites is called Buy a Feature. It's by Luke Holman, and it's in the book Innovation Games. But if you just Google Buy a Feature, you'll find some stuff. There's even tools to do that online. And what that does is gives everybody like monopoly money, and they kind of have to use that money to work together to buy things, but builds consensus. I think story mapping is a great way once you're a little bit probably more, if you're at an initiative level, Buy a Feature might be better, but if you're like within the scope of an initiative or a project, or some major kind of enhancement, story mapping can allow people to prioritize within the context. And so there's a book called Story Mapping by Jeff Patton, Patton, that is a good technique for that. And then, there's always like the Moscow, like must, should, could. But again, that exercise would still be everybody in a room prioritizing together. Don't do like at one point in my career, I created the spreadsheet and sent it out to everybody to stack rank their own. And then I had to create some formula. And that was kind of more the divide and conquer kind of approach.
All right, next one. What's the biggest factor in moving from downward chaos to upward learning?
I think, so I think you're talking about the chaos and resistance to turning into integration practice. I think that pivot point is when people are getting comfortable enough with like the lingo. They understand, so say the change was day one, we said, everybody's going to do Scrum now. And nobody knew what Scrum was. They're like, what the hell is this thing that you're asking me to do? Scrum? That seems weird. And all of a sudden you say, there's a new person that's a Scrum Master and somebody's a product owner, and we're going to do sprint planning and daily Scrums and review and retro. And it's all foreign language, right, to the team because they've never done it before. And it's new and it's scary because they don't know how to do it, and they know that they're being held accountable. So the biggest thing is they need the ability to practice. And what I usually see is it takes about 3 to 6 sprints for a team to kind of get through and start coming back up the other side. And so that's 3 to 6 sprints or 3 to 6 cycles of learning, right? So one of the key things is the retrospective, right? If there's only one thing that you implemented, it would be the retrospective every couple weeks. And so if that's the element of like the biggest factor, is that the teams are actually talking. And in the retrospective, they're talking about how can they get better. And I think I'll tie this even back into the how do you get people to feel empowered is, I think the retrospective is one of those ways where, they're in a room and they're being asked, like, all right, what do you want to do to improve your process? And that they're given space to do that. And so I think the retrospective is the key thing, those cycles. But they also have to have some time to just try some things and kind of have the support to go through that.
All right. Have you seen this practice work well in IT infrastructure teams versus app development?
Yes, but and so the IT infrastructure, what I would do is pretty much everything at this level I think is the same, but I would probably look at more Kanban versus Scrum from a framework perspective. And so Kanban being Kanban. And the reason for that, and I guess like a couple of questions I would always ask is like, how big are the initiatives that you're working on? And so a lot of times I see in IT infrastructure that while they have some bigger things, there are a lot of smaller things like, hey, we need to go upgrade all of our servers, or we need to do this. And then the other question is how much of your work is interrupt driven versus you can plan out your week. And I see in IT infrastructure, there's a lot more percentage of interrupt-driven work. And so Kanban, which still says limit WIP, it still says have self-organizing teams, it still says has a continuous improvement culture, right? But what it changes is instead of planning out, a couple weeks at a time, it says let's have more of a continuous flow of as one thing finishes, we'll grab the next highest priority thing. And for interrupt-driven teams or for teams that have a lot of smaller stuff, Kanban can work. Now, if you're an IT infrastructure team that, you've got a team of people and all they do are bigger planned out initiatives, well, then Scrum might work, better for them. But all of the principles, the core principles apply actually even outside of IT and software development. We've worked with marketing organizations, we've worked with HR organizations, we've worked with operations to help, implement a lot of these concepts of, every team in the organization has too much work and they need to prioritize and limit WIP. Every team has people that are really smart, but they're not being empowered. And so, we need to change our leadership paradigm around that and create, retrospectives and things like that for them to improve. We need to make work visible so that we can make better decisions, right? All of these things apply in any part of the organization, all the way up to the executive team.
One around transitioning from waterfall. So what tips do you have besides time and having management show support to encourage former waterfall employees to access self-empowerment?
I think I did that one. That was one of the first ones, right? Yeah. There was one in here though I saw. What tips do you have for encouraging cross-functional teams in a matrix organization?
From Brandon.
Yeah, so Brandon's second question. Yeah, so that one is, this one's the biggest challenge. This one is the biggest impediment we see organizations struggle with, and we see organizations the leadership resist making this change, and I see it as the biggest impact, number one, bar none, that keeps organizations from truly getting all the benefits of Agile that they're seeking. And so, so a lot of this depends on where the culture is today. So I've seen organizations that have, switched from the output, the component teams to the feature teams and didn't change any of the managers, right? So as you mentioned, like more matrix driven. So all the UI people still report to a UI manager, but they're working in a feature team that's cross-functional. I've seen other organizations that have changed the whole management structure, right? Where no longer is there a UI manager or a middle tier manager or a database manager. There is now a manager for a feature team or a manager for multiple feature teams. And then maybe there's a database architect who is responsible for the database layer in done that. So I think there's no one size fits all. on that. I think part of it depends on the culture. I even had an organization that kind of like took all the frontline managers, and for it was like 4 to 6 weeks, they had no people management, and they just said, this was an organization that had about 6 teams, so about 50 people, and they said everybody just reports to the VP for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And the reason why they did that was because the managers were so output driven and so like hands-on, telling everybody what to do. The VP kind of wanted to remove that layer of control, and he knew if he just assigned them a feature team, everybody would just look to the manager and say, what do we do? And so so that's something that he just wanted to, like, let's get used to working as feature teams and everybody feeling empowered, and then later he kind of moved those managers into feature teams.
Is this directed primarily at software development or an overall business operational culture?
I think most Agile adoptions, mainstream, come out of the software world. However, what I'm starting to, starting to express is that it applies across the whole board, right? So, I mean, I think the issues that we're seeing could be leadership at really any level, the sabotages that we see. And it just depends on what's the scope of your transformation. Are you trying to change how the delivery team's working, or are you trying to change how the organization as a whole is operating? And I think what you would see is anytime you think that you're really just talking about the software group, you're really talking about the whole business, because what does the software group do? It enables the business, right? And so everything that the software is doing is integrated into the business operations. And so, if you're a software product company, it is the core of what you do. So while people mistake that we're doing an Agile adoption, that's just a software problem, the reality is if you're doing an Agile adoption, you've got a company problem. And there's just one part of it, which is having the teams in the software team, group start working in a Scrum fashion, right? So I think it definitely applies at that higher level.
The last one that we have open is for organizations where there is a fierce drive to meet business commitments and deadlines. How do you help get senior leadership more open-minded to allow a learning environment, especially if there are offshore teams involved, which has a cost associated with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has a cost, right? And that's the biggest, that's a big problem with IT, is just that everything's really expensive, right? So what I usually start with is kind of like that green line, red line story a little bit. And when I talk to leaders and I say, are you happy with how things are going today? And none of them are. None of them are happy with how IT is doing today. Like, do we have a track record in our technology teams of delivering on time with all the scope? And if you go to ask anybody in the business, they say never, right? Even if you think you do, like your business doesn't think you do. Because even if you delivered what you thought was the scope, it's not necessarily what they thought was going to be the scope, or what they needed as the highest priority. Maybe their priorities change. So if you talk to senior leaders and you say, hey, are you happy with how IT's working? They say no. All right. And you say, well, I think I have a way to address that, but I'm going to need your help, right? I'm going to need your help. And just shoving more paper in the printer, right? Because part of your question there was like, we have everything. We got to do everything. Well, just because you want everything doesn't mean that we can do everything. And if you really break it down, every leader understands the cost of multitasking. Every leader understands the cost of trying to do too much at once. But they forget all those things when they get to IT. And I think part of it is because of a lack of trust. And I think part of it is because we're not giving them dates because we have no predictability, or they don't believe any of our dates. So since they don't trust that we haven't built any track record of delivering on time delivering predictably, if we can't demonstrate that we can deliver predictably, then they're just going to tell us what the dates are, right? If we say, well, we have no idea when anything's going to be delivered, they'll say, well, then I'll tell you, you just got to get all this stuff done. Or if we say, well, you know, we keep giving them dates and we never hit our dates, then they're just going to tell us what that is. And so when I go talk to the leaders, what I'm going to say is, look, we've sucked at delivering these dates. You guys don't trust us at all. We want to get predictable, but in order to get predictable, we're going to need some help from you, and we're going to need a little bit of space. Can you give us, 3 to 6 sprints to go get our house in order to kind of get predictable, so that then we can have this type of conversation? Now, I agree, the outsource thing adds a whole different dynamic, especially if that's a vendor and they're not even in your control. So can you even get them doing Agile? There's a whole dynamic of that. There's a whole dynamic of, are they really even saving you any money? And there's a whole nother thing around this, which is a concern of, like, people think we can just add more people immediately and burst up if we need to get more done and just throw more money at it. The issue isn't actually how much money these projects are being funded. The issue is how high performing the team is. And is the team actually delivering value, and how much waste is involved in that? So I think there's a question, I don't know if we answered Moroni's question 1151 that I see here, which is when you are changing the way the leadership prioritizes items. Is that the one I just did? No.
We did that earlier.
Okay.
We talked about by feature.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I think that's all that we see. If you have other questions, you can always submit them to marketing@agilevelocity.com, and we'll make sure to get you answers or anything else you may need to kind of help you in your journey. And as you said, we will package everything up in a blog post with the recorded webinar and then the Q&A. And it should be sent to you guys tomorrow.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got some value.